again, you can have your belief system, right? It's just, you have your belief system, but then what do you do with all of these other pieces of research and information that come through that deeply, deeply challenge that belief system? And don't get me wrong, I can understand, the general human psychological incentive to not want to disrupt your belief system too much. But when we're talking about a subject that is groundbreaking, I mean, it changes what it means to be human. It changes our relationship in the universe and the galaxy is. It changes potentially who we may be engaging with or interacting with, the nature of our reality. Like, so many questions are challenged by the UFO phenomenon and what it has shown, that it's like, I mean, this could potentially be groundbreakingly good for humanity. It could be groundbreakingly bad, but the chances of that are so small when you look at the total picture.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you wrote a piece. I think it was did we publish it this week or last week?
Maybe a couple of weeks ago. Wrote a piece about the state of ufology and where we're at today, and where most people are at with regards to UFOs and extraterrestrials.
Yeah, and I think that's an important discussion, not just because the extraterrestrial discussion is getting larger, but because the pattern of what has happened with a story that, hey, you're not allowed to talk about this, being ridiculed for talking about this, and then now it's talked about openly. And it resembles so many other topics where, we've seen over the years, we would talk about something, say in 2012, 2013, and then by 2017, and we get ridiculed for it. And then by 2017, it's now open conversation. And so this pattern is happening. And what I think we're going to talk about today that is really important is what this pattern produces is that when something becomes more mainstream, there's a lot of surface level analyzation of the topic that is done to sort of like cheaply offer some sort of insight or critique about it without actually doing any sort of deeper research that honestly has been around for decades prior. And that's happening right now with the UFO discussion. So
and like before, it wasn't on everybody's radar. Now it's like on everybody's radar, and it's kind of with like other topics with separation of beliefs and what these things are. We see it in the UFO field. And it's getting wild out there.
When you say UFO field, I picture this like massive field with all these UFOs parked, and it's just like, that's the field of UFOs. But yeah, no. So I think it's important to go through this because I think a lot of people are offering very surface level analyses of what's going on now that this subject is more popular. But there's actually a ton. It's like that saying, you don't know what you don't know. Like there's a ton of research that has been done that doesn't get platformed. It isn't super popular.
Yeah, in the mainstream, it's a certain narrative, and like a lot of information and research from the past is being completely ignored, and we're not getting like a holistic picture of the phenomenon from the mainstream and governments and stuff like that. There's a lot being left out, and
so I think this will be important. So why don't we start with like you sort of laid out a bit of a thesis around some of the ways in which people are looking at this there's subject.
4 main categories right now, I believe, of like where people are at with regards to UFOs. The first category I laid out was kind of the deep divers, the longtime UFO researchers who have been into this topic for, like myself, 15 plus years, and just have gone through a variety of research in the field, and just kind of have a holistic view of the phenomenon from all perspectives. So that's the first category. The second one are the newcomers, because this topic has gone mainstream in the last few years, official government disclosure and whatnot, and official releases and, coverage on mainstream media. There's this big group of newcomers who didn't know anything about the subject, weren't even interested in it, but they rely on mainstream media, and they have no qualms questioning it. And that's where they get all their information. They're all of a sudden seeing all this credible UFO stuff in the New York Times, the Washington Post and stuff. So now all of a sudden they're interested in the topic, and they're hooked on these sources, official sources, government sources, mainstream media sources, as their source of information. These people are not really aware of everything, all the research, a holistic view. So that's,
and how those sources that they're into have been deceptive for
years
decades.
prior. We'll get to that when we discuss that group in depth. Category 3 is kind of like the agenda people, meaning they think the phenomenon is real, but they think it's kind of deception, government deception. There's this Project Bluebeam holographic, or they might think they're government-made craft flying around. So
Right.
we'll get into that and talk. Like it's basically all deception.
So there's no ETs. It's just
For the most part, yeah. No
yeah,
ETs,
it's
just kind
a
of false
distraction
flag.
to get people. Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
Towards marching closer towards a new world order. And all these categories overlap in a bit.
Yeah.
And by the way, but and the fourth one is kind of the religious people. Nothing wrong with being religious and this, and there's subcategories within this, but I find a lot of people in this category believe the phenomenon is demonic or either angelic, mostly demonic kind of stuff. So
they're kind of seeing it as like paranormal or supernatural, but they're bad entities.
Yes,
right.
Bad, malevolent, deception kind of stuff.
Right.
And so yeah, those are the four categories. And then like I wrote an article about this and kind of went a little deeper into each category, and that's kind of what I think we should do today.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think what's interesting about this is like going back to just the process of like, so we're having this like mainstream discussion about a topic, and we can post an article and and see whether it's Telegram comments, whether it's Facebook comments, whether it's sometimes on YouTube, you see all of these different like what we'll call is just like sort of quick spews of someone's belief system about it. But, and I think this is why this conversation is good. And this, again, goes into so many other conversations, is the responses are often just, but my belief system says this, therefore I'm not even really listening to what you're saying. I'm not even really listening to the evidence. I'm just, my belief system says this, and that doesn't matter. And what I think is interesting about this, because the deep divers, I think are the ones that are more willing to look at the whole picture.
Yeah, they have a view of deep divers. Number one, they have a view of the newcomers, the agenda people, and the religious view. Whereas I find the people in the other categories don't kind of have a holistic view like the deep divers.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong, but
but
there are some like religious people who are aware of what I'm aware of too, and they just have their beliefs. And like you said, belief systems, when you come across evidence that contradicts what you believe, it's tough. And in our field, I think we've done a good job of kind of having an open mind. And
right. So here's a question: if you're a deep diver, like what would you say is like the best evidence that this is not just, let's say, demonic, or this is not just some government conspiracy or cover up?
The main thing I go to is deep divers are aware of that this phenomenon has been documented for thousands of years. Like, when the printing press came out, there are multiple examples. There's an example from Germany in Nuremberg in like the 1500s, and there's example through artwork through like the 10th century all the way up to today of UFOs. And then, when we started documenting things in the 40s, 50s, there's radar tracking data. The phenomenon is extremely old, and it's documented thousands of years ago, right? So it's real in that sense, unless there was some sort of deception, Project Bluebeam 2,000 years ago, or governments were manufacturing UFOs 2,000 years ago.
Right.
And so that's one. And just not even that, the stories in the printing press, the literature, there are so many examples from antiquity. So that's the main thing where I think the government deception part, like there could be government deception, there could be government crafts, but the phenomenon is older than government.
Right.
So it's
older than government that's capable of reverse engineering.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's quite ancient.
Yeah.
So that's the main thing. And yeah.
So that would be your one main thing to say, that all of these craft can't just be
manipulation or deception. So that would be my point against. I would like to see what the kind of agenda people who think it's Project Bluebeam, this and that, or human craft and this all deception. I'd like to think, what would they say to that fact?
Well, I think they'd probably say something to the effect of, well, paintings of a craft or reports of a craft could have been misinterpreted. We don't have any, camera evidence. We don't have any. That's what they would probably say.
Then I would say, like, there's so many cases of paintings and in the printing press and reports and witness testimonies. Like there's just too many.
Yeah, I think it leads back to, it's sort of like this question of moving from, this is the reason, or this is the truth or to this is a potential truth, meaning like, yeah, potentially people misinterpreted what they saw in the sky, but potentially they interpreted what they saw in the sky, and you don't really know.
Right.
So you have to keep collecting factors. You have to keep looking more deeply.
Yeah, exactly. And for the newcomers, for example, so we've got a lot of mainstream disclosure, like popular names, Lou Elizondo, former Pentagon official, Christopher Mellon, former Assistant Defense Secretary. These guys have been at the forefront in getting the government to release information, and the U.S. government has released videos of UFOs. They've released files. Governments around the world, and we're getting a very sanitized version, as I've said many times in my articles, of
same thing, three-letter agencies
of the UFO phenomenon, where we're getting these videos. We're being told in the mainstream we don't know what these objects are. Right. And bills have recently been passed to allow military whistleblowers to come forward. But there's been so many military whistleblowers of all ranks in the past 2 decades that have told incredible stories. These people are being ignored. This is never presented on mainstream media, and basically we're being told that they don't know what these objects are, which contradicts.
So on that note, and this is a bit more of like a nuanced piece, but on that note of like, there's been whistleblowers, there've been people that have been coming out for a long time. I think back to, let's just say, the Disclosure Project, 1999, Stephen Greer. Another phenomenon that I see in this space. So for those not familiar with Greer's Disclosure Project in 99, he brought together like tons of military, ex-military scientists, whatever, like
and regardless of what people think about what Greer is, these people and these highly
they told their stories, right? And you could say that was we're talking tons of government employees. We're talking tons of military employees.
With verified backgrounds.
That was a disclosure to some extent. Now, what you just brought up about Greer is, and I'm curious where you might put this in your categories, but what I see happening a lot is people will say, well, Greer is a bad guy, or he worked with government, so you can't trust him, or he talks about consciousness, so you're not allowed to trust him. Therefore, they ignore everything that Disclosure Project really. So there's an assassination of the messenger, which then avoids all of the message. Where would you put that type of behavior in your 4 categories?
Maybe the agenda people. Maybe they would think Greer is part of some sort of agenda or something, but then why wouldn't he be presented on mainstream media and emphasized? Why would these whistleblowers?
And Mellon?
Yeah, like Elizondo and Mellon, and in the mainstream, like we're just getting, like I said before, like it could be used for anything. The mainstream is saying that they want to explain the phenomenon, start studying it. All right, that's a lie in itself. They've been studying the phenomenon for 20, 30, 40 years, right? So they're setting people up, the newcomers, category 2, to receive an explanation from them. Right. So, and that explanation it's hard to trust. So I empathize with the agenda people because I don't trust governments either, right? And as far as Greer, like, I personally don't judge people. I don't judge, not that I don't judge people, but I'm not going to judge Greer and what people say about him. And like, he's his own person. He's going to have his beliefs about the phenomenon. What he did and those military whistleblowers he brought forward was huge. And there were like hundreds of them. And even from other countries. And even if you go beyond what Greer did, there's a lot of corroborating stories and stuff. And all these whistleblowers, like colonels, generals, like, you're never going to hear anything about this in the mainstream. So you're only going to get information from the Pentagon and their specific view of the phenomenon, whatever it may be, to debunk the extraterrestrial hypothesis, to create some sort of false flag event. I don't know. Who knows?
So not to go off topic, but very much related to this discussion is a bit of like a question around sense making, which is, you might write, for example, in an article, I can't think off the top of my head, but this is what happens. You may have found a piece of research about somebody with connections. Like, for example, somebody that is now on the board at Facebook had connections with DARPA in the past, or had connection with the defense agency. So what's happening is we're judging their potential conflict of interest. We're judging that they might be working with Facebook under some sense of nefariousness that's passing back information to government. So as an investigative journalist, there's sometimes those connections. Now, how then do you take that in the realm of, don't we need to ask, well, Stephen Greer did meet with the Clintons and did debrief them, and Lou Elizondo did work, for the government in the past. So how do you go about discerning these different people's histories and discerning what to make of the information they're putting out now.
It's tough, and that's why I think I have an easier time from a deep UFO researcher's perspective, because I've looked at stuff from ancient times, from like in antiquity, 1500s, all the way to present day. I basically have looked at hundreds of whistleblowers, thousands of experiencers, and when you do that, you can kind of put things together. Like, nothing Lou Elizondo from the government has said is not true. Like, he's brought up the fact that these objects are tracked on radar, this and that, and same with Greer's military whistleblowers. So it's not like they've said any lies now. It's kind of where we get into muddy waters is the explanation of what the phenomenon is. Right. And Elizondo ridiculed Greer, saying, oh, if you want to talk about consciousness and sit in the lotus position, this and that. Like, he ridiculed that idea, and I don't like that. And it could be a very spiritual phenomenon. Well, you look at contactees and the experiences they've had. There are thousands of corroborating stories there, and these stories also corroborate with a bunch of military whistleblowers. So that would be a benevolent, and where there's care, these beings care. So that's the benevolent side. Then there's a malevolent side of cattle manipulations, forced abductions. So there's a big picture here.
There's a huge picture. And I think you have to make an honest effort to look at all the pieces. And I think this is where, if I were to say sometimes the agenda people, maybe, I don't want to judge the religious folk as not having done their research, but I mean, maybe as well. But like a book like this, for example, The Science of Consciousness and Contact with Non-Human Intelligence, Volume 1. This was done by Dr. Edgar Mitchell's Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences. I mean, this is a massive, we're talking about like 700 pages. This was a study involving thousands and thousands of people who claim to be contact experience, whether
Mostly,
it was so it was non-human intelligence. So in some
benevolent
cases,
experiences.
well, not necessarily. It was whatever experience you had, period, right? And they categorize. I mean, there's tables. This is a very, very, I think it is the most in-depth investigation into, I would say, the question of sort of human contact with non-human, I mean, that's what it's called, right? Non-human intelligence. And it's very in-depth, involved thousands of people. And it sheds an incredible amount of light. You hear people all the time, well, the phenomenon's demonic. Well, you look at it and you say, well, hold on a second, because of the thousands of people, you look at their experiences and some of the data, and it's like, well, 70% of people saw themselves as contactees, not abductees. So they didn't feel like they were abducted; they were contacted.
Deceiving. It's deception.
Well, no, but here's how it was defined, right? It was defined as, when they were asking the questions to the contactees, they were saying things like, when you had your contact experience, did you feel like you were being controlled? Did you feel like it was egalitarian? Were these beings meeting you like face to face in a friendly manner? And they said 70% of them felt like it was contactee related, not abductee, because I was just there, a part of it, and they were contacting me in a very benevolent manner.
And then go ahead.
85% of them reported positive changes in action. So they suddenly started making complete changes in their lives that were very, very positive, meaning this experience had massive consciousness shifting effects on them that made their lives noticeably better. And that's 85% of people. Right.
The majority of cases in the UFO field and the experiences and the corroboration, I would say the majority of them, even though there are malevolent stories out there and a percentage of that, the majority of them are benevolent and non-threatening type of experiences.
66% said that they felt it was a positive experience.
Right.
29% said it was neutral. Only 5% said that it was a negative experience.
And we're not making a case for angelic aliens. We're just looking at the data,
looking at the research,
and the research that's out there.
And why this research is important is because you have to ask the question in the context of this story. What do you do with this research? You can't just avoid it, right? You can't just throw it out because I said research. That's all. But 91% said that they would classify their experience as not evil, not malevolent. 9% said that it was bad, malevolent, or evil.
And then there's intricacies within these experiences that go even deeper that like the newcomers wouldn't be aware about. For example, if you saw an animal on the road who was struggling and you took it in to help it heal, it's going to be terrified at first.
Yeah.
It's going to think you're trying to kill it. It may not even have a proper perspective of what you did for it. If you freed it from a cage or whatever, right, it would want to bite you. It would be terrified.
Right.
So we may not understand certain things that have been done to people who have so-called negative experiences.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who have had negative experiences, quote unquote, later on, like Travis Walton, he was terrified. He thought he was having, later on he realized, okay, what was being done to me? Maybe it wasn't that bad. There's things he
changed his perspective a lot.
And we just don't understand. So there's a lot of that in there as well. And and it's just like, if you told this to a religious person, for example, there's no looking at the data and the research. Basically, it's just, they'll refer to the Book of Enoch, Anunnaki, Nephilim. And I've been through all that as a deep UFO researcher, and just, it's interesting stuff. But
I think it comes back to the question of, like, again, you can have your belief system, right? It's just, you have your belief system, but then what do you do with all of these other pieces of research and information that come through that deeply, deeply challenge that belief system? And don't get me wrong, I can understand, the general human psychological incentive to not want to disrupt your belief system too much. But when we're talking about a subject that is groundbreaking, I mean, it changes what it means to be human. It changes our relationship in the universe and the galaxy is. It changes potentially who we may be engaging with or interacting with, the nature of our reality. Like, so many questions are challenged by the UFO phenomenon and what it has shown, that it's like, I mean, this could potentially be groundbreakingly good for humanity. It could be groundbreakingly bad, but the chances of that are so small when you look at the total picture.
Yeah.
But
it's a
huge question.
Yeah. And sometimes I wonder, like, with all the mainstream disclosure that's happened and everything, we've said it'd be groundbreaking for years, and it is. But there's so many other things that have been groundbreaking that humanity just doesn't care about, really. Right. And are people, like, the way we're controlled and the way we do things and the way we live right now, are people really going to care? The government's going to give their explanation. And I understand the agenda people, because the government deceives us so much. Yeah. But like, they take real phenomenon and provide an explanation for that, like the chemical gas attacks in Syria, 9/11, whatever. It doesn't mean that the phenomenon is not real and it's all deception. There's nuances in there.
So let's put it on the table a little bit, because any piece of information that we engage with, for the most part, I mean, it doesn't have to be we don't have to take life so seriously, but the point is like, when we're engaging with information, social media, news, whatever, it's meaningful if we know what to do, how to take action on what we just learned, how to use it in our life, how to make meaning with it. In this subject of UFO, if you were to lay out, like, why is this important? Why should people even care about the discussion we're having right now around, these 4 categories of people, this phenomenon? If you are hearing this message, it's because you are a free subscriber to The Pulse. To become a paid subscriber, please join us on Substack, and you will get access to not only the full video, but the full audio experience here for the Pulse Weekly. If you happen to be an Explorer Lounge member, check out the Explorer Lounge for the full episode.